This is going to be something like our 19th Barichara updates call. I think it's number 19. We didn't have this meeting for the last 2 weeks because of the travel that Penny and I were doing. As you can see with Penny being on another screen, it's because she's still in Colorado and I've returned to Barichara and I got in last night. And today, what I want to be able to share with all of you is, in a way, just going to mute everyone so we don't have any background noise. In a way, what I want to talk about today is not very much about Barichara, except that everything that we're doing for other bioregions is because of the work we're doing in Barichara. And just this morning, as I was telling Penny, I got back last night. I slept on the floor, slept in quotes, on the floor by baggage claim in Fort Lauderdale's airport the night before because I had an overnight layover. So I got like an hour of sleep for like 24 hours of travel, and basically was just like exhausted, totally exhausted. And so, which is why I have not prepared any slides for today, although I do have a lot of photos I could share. And for those of you who saw what I posted on Earth Regenerators a few days ago, we were able to visit and help catalyze 4 bioregions in the span of 8 days while we were in Colorado. And we are learning a lot about how to do it. And so there's a chair over here too, if you want to just grab this one. And Stephen's going to join me. Or maybe I'm joining you since, he's from the Boulder area, but he's been in Barichara while I was there. We had to have some breakfast together and say hi.
Just face body swapping, region swapping.
But actually, just to give you a sense of how dynamic my world is, while Stephen and I are trying to catch up, this almost 6-year-old boy who decided I look like a pirate, true, I do, turned me into like a Disney character and was just interrupting every time we tried to talk to tell me stories about pirates in Spanish in the place where we had breakfast this morning. That kid was really cute.
Yeah, totally.
But totally needed a friend. But then as Stephen and I are talking, I start talking with my friend Juliana, who came in with her 3-month-old son. And I'm explaining to her how we're starting to weave education activities in Barichara. And I think I've talked to like 7 people in Barichara this morning about how to integrate our educational activities at the territorial scale while I'm trying to relax and catch up on sleep and rest. It's like the universe just doesn't think I'm supposed to stop ever. And it just thinks it's really funny if I try and take 5 minutes to myself. Like I went to the Bioparque to recover and have some connection there, but I ended up spending 10 minutes listening to an audio message from Jessica, from my ex, about how we're going to be designing the education of Elise. And that was my time in the Bioparque, relaxing. So it just gives you a sense of what life is like. But what I want to do today is talk with all of you about how the work that we're doing, we're now 3 years into the work in Barichara for the role that I've been playing in helping to integrate these landscape scale processes. And last week, we visited 4 bioregions in Colorado. And now Penny, Benji, and I are working as the core team of bioregional activators and figuring out what all of that looks like. And Benji, I was just reading the draft of the article you were writing about our time in Peonia and Carbondale that I haven't finished yet, but I can't wait until everyone gets to read what you've been writing, because you've just given such richness. For those of you who don't know, Benji, like part of his heart is planted in the western slopes of Colorado. And I could not have known Benji in that way until we drove there together and got to watch him revisiting these landscapes in the way that we did. It's just so beautiful to be able to give the gift to Benji of being a part of that while getting to receive the gift of seeing Benji being a part of that. Which he will be sharing more about. And I might actually invite Benji and Penny to share a little bit today about what happened. What I want to start with for today is that we are renaming these calls from Barichara Updates to Barichara and Beyond. And that's because I wanted a simple, short title that would be easy to read on like places like Twitter when I share links about it. But that really says there is no longer any realistic way to separate what's happening in this bioregion with all the other bioregions. Just makes no sense. to even try to separate it, even though there's so much happening here in Colombia. And what I want to emphasize for today is two things. One is, what does it mean to activate a landscape? And I want to talk to you about that and how we're learning to do that. And two, I want to share with you a little bit about sort of the confusing mess of where things are in Barichara right now, because there's so much happening and we're working on integrating it. And a confusing mess in an absolutely positive way. It's sort of like we're overwhelmed by how much is going on. Including, as I was saying to Jonathan at the beginning of the call, I just got a notice this morning that the Mustard Seed Trust is giving us $10,000 for our work in syntropic agriculture, which will pass through Possible Planet as a fiscal sponsor and then arrive to our foundation. And this is something that's been growing for the last several months, which means there is now confirmed continuity of flow for funding for syntropic agriculture. And the money we received from Gitcoin, from the Gitcoin round back in October, which we were thinking the majority of that money would go to syntropic agriculture, but now that may open up and more of it can go to other projects in Barichara. And so what I really want to do right now, though, is I want to tell you a couple of stories. And I want to tell them without pictures. So I'm going to actually go into a sort of, I'll spotlight myself so I can tell you a couple of stories. And what I want to emphasize here is that these stories I'm about to tell are so rich and alive that I'm sure that as I'm telling them, all of you will be reminded of community experiences you've had. And in particular, Benji and Penny will have, I'm going to be telling a story about what we've been doing together. So if Benji or Penny, if either of you would like to continue the story and tell a little bit more, I'd love to pass the baton. So just so you'll get the opportunity to almost like there's a fire circle that Benji, Penny, and I are sitting in. And if any of you have ever done the fishbowl facilitation technique, where a group of 4 people sit in the circle and other people enter or leave the circle, the rest of you might feel like you're sitting behind the circle of watching Benji, Penny, and I tell stories as a way of trying to capture some of the richness of what we experienced. And so to contextualize this in the Barichara history, Refi Barichara happened a little over a month ago. And I think most of you here are probably aware that we had about 60 people come from all over the Web3, crypto, decentralized digital tools world, all coming to Barichara to do work with us embedded into our landscape, where we connected them with a lot of on-the-ground projects. And Penny and I came out of Refi Barichara on the final day like, holy shit, we're in a different reality. And now we have to live really differently. And we might have to travel a lot. And that was not our plan. And so we're still living in the shock and disorientation of that. But one thing that came out of it was bioregional activators and a way of seeing that we have a story to tell about what it means to bring pro-social processes, collective trauma healing, and landscape management frameworks and tools and resources to different landscapes, and that we have an urgency to do it. And so Penny was already planning to go back to Colorado to sort of organize the closing off of her old life, empty her storage unit, close some bank accounts, figure out what she really needed to bring to come live in Barichara permanently. And so she already had this trip planned. And I didn't want to be away from her for a full month. So I decided I'd travel with her for the beginning of the trip. That was my motivation to go to Colorado. But then I did something that actually is why I know Claire and Pamela, which is back in 2019, before my family moved to Colombia, there was a period of about 2 months where we were staying in Bremerton, just outside of Seattle, after we had left Costa Rica. And during those 2 months, I just went on social media and said, for 2 months, I'm in the US. If anyone would like for me to travel and come to your community, I will give free talks and workshops, just invite me. And if you could help cover the travel costs, that would be great. And so for 2 months, I ended up giving about a dozen public talks and free workshops in different communities, wherever I was invited to go, including Victoria, which is where I met Claire and Pamela, because I was invited to go there. And so I decided to do the same thing again. I said, for about 2 weeks, I'll be in Colorado with Penny. Would anyone like to invite us to come and talk about bioregional regeneration? And that's how we ended up being invited to visit what we now know are 4 distinct bioregions in Colorado, which was not at all clear to us when we were arriving there. So those 4 bioregions, for those of you who know Colorado, 2 of them are defined by river basins, the Roaring River or the Roaring Fork Basin, which is where Aspen, Colorado is, and Carbondale, and it's the wealthiest county in the United States. All the super rich people that bought vacation spots in Aspen. And so the Roaring Fork River Basin, which is on the western slopes of Colorado. And then we went to the Gunnison River Basin, which is one of the biggest agricultural, like organic agriculture and biodynamic farming places in Colorado, and probably one of the biggest biodynamic farming, like savory method types of work anywhere in the country, because the Savory Institute is based just outside of Boulder. And so these are both 2 watersheds on the western slope. And then we also went to a place called Rollinsville, which is a tiny little town that holds an ecological corridor just east of the Continental Divide in the Central Rockies, hosted by a guy named Alex, who is part of a group called Regenerative Community Land Trust and another group called Recommon, which we are now actively collaborating with after this trip. And then the 4th one was the Front Range, which is where the Rocky Mountains become the Great Plains, which is sort of our loose way of describing Denver and Boulder as landscapes that absolutely need to collapse. They have deeply entrenched globalization infrastructure, so they cannot possibly be regenerative economies. And yet there are huge numbers of regenerative people doing work. And the food shed around around Boulder has some of the best regenerative agriculture in the world, co-located with IBM and Google and more Tesla cars than you see anywhere else in the world, super rich people completely entrenched in the globalized economy. And until that economy collapses, they cannot possibly be a regenerative economy. And yet it is a hotspot of regenerative practice. And so lots of paradoxes in that. And so what we found was that we were invited into several landscapes, and we learned how to arrive into a landscape as bioregional activators, instead of just a term, like a name for ourselves. And I want to briefly share some of what we experienced. So like when we first arrived in Denver, we went to a place called Shared House. It's like a sort of a co-working community impact space in a church. So there's some social entrepreneurs there, Adam Brock and Christina Ryan, who have been creating this social impact hub in Denver. And they invited us to come and participate in bioregional dialogues. But they intentionally facilitated in a way that failed to have the opportunity to benefit from us coming. They just sort of made us sit in groups and do peer-to-peer sharing and didn't do anything like what happened in Peonia a few days later. But we did go there and get a feel for who was in the community that we could form networks with and weave into the rest of our time there. So it turned out to be really productive, although there was really sort of no follow through and no forward momentum from that Shared House gathering. It sort of just was a nice 2-hour conversation that then died at the end of the conversation because of the lack of cultural scaffolding to continue it. But one of the things that happened there was our dear friend Benjamin Life, who's actually another Benjamin Ross, same name as our darling Benji. And both Ben Rosses were in the Community Regenerators cohort for Earth Regenerators back in 2020. And that's actually why Benji goes by Benji. It's because they were both Ben, and Benji was like, I'll be the Benji. And so Benjamin Life, who lives in Boulder, invited Penny and me to come to a dinner party on the first Wednesday we were there. And he connected us with people that were working on bringing together the leadership of all the independent political parties in the US. You know, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, et cetera, et cetera. For those of you who don't know, about 100 million US citizens, like more than a third of the adult population, do not affiliate with the Democratic or the Republican Party. But because it's a winner-take-all two-party system, those third parties are completely invisible and have no place in the national political discourse, which is one of many reasons why the United States political system is completely fucked. It's just a total shit show. And so there is Ben Life's brother, Christopher, is actually working with the leadership of all of those independent parties to create an independent political movement. And there's an opportunity to bring bioregionalism to them, to basically create the political movement for after the collapse of the United States, with memberships numbering at the level of 100 million US citizens. And so we had this really interesting conversation about what it would mean to have political conversations about bioregional governance, where the brokenness of the US political system is exactly why people come for the conversation. rather than trying to fix that broken system, which is absolutely beyond hope of fixing. And gives a place to channel all the activism of the United States, which is mostly misplaced trauma masturbation at this point in time. People masturbate with their trauma, trying to fix things, only re-traumatizing themselves. And that is called US politics right now. I think you all know what I'm talking about. And so at that meeting, there were people working on crypto-based digital infrastructure, including someone that using the Luna and the Terra platform. Antonio will know what I'm talking about. And those of you who work with crypto will know what I talk about. They had created a financing tool that was generating $5 million in revenue per month to give to regenerative projects until the Luna collapsed earlier this year. And Antonio, you were completely vindicated in what you said. The collapse of the crypto markets this year wiped out speculative extraction and kept the regenerative part, the refi part is what survived. And so there's someone in Boulder who's in the consciousness community who has figured out, is a serial entrepreneur, had figured out how to use an algorithm to pull money off of the extractive system and direct it toward regenerative projects, but it collapsed with the speculative part of crypto earlier this year. And he has since, in the same way Antonio has done, completely redirected himself to refi to build the same infrastructure again. Mikael, this will sound a lot like what you're doing too. These are people who have figured out how to build platforms to direct huge flows of money, and their giant absence, the thing they don't know how to do, is to organize on-the-ground projects that can receive the money. And so we were in one of those conversations with someone who could generate that kind of decentralized financial support to all of our projects. So just giving you a feel for how the Front Range around Boulder and Denver has all these powerful people who don't really have the structure on the ground to create regenerative economies, but have huge, deep capacities to bring to bioregions. And that was a major theme for us, was that the Front Range around Denver and Boulder could partner with Rollinsville, Roaring Fork, and Gunnison Basin to help stimulate and accelerate their regenerative efforts at bioregional scales. When we got to, I'll just jump to Paonia to give you all a flavor. Paonia is a little town of 1,500 people, and it's on the North Fork of the Gunnison River on the western slopes of Colorado. This is a river which includes the headwaters of the Colorado River. So the Colorado River that goes all the way to the Gulf of California in Mexico, which actually no longer does because they take all the water and pipe it all to California, and Mexico no longer gets any water. The Colorado River is a textbook example about how to create water wars by over allocating the water usage in the 1950s. And now everyone in Southwestern United States is going to fight over the water from Colorado. And the headwaters of the Colorado River are in the Colorado part of the Rocky Mountains. And the Gunnison River is one of those major, it goes through Phoenix, it goes through Tucson. It brings water to the Central Valley of California. It's a big deal, the Colorado River. And we were at its headwaters, where people are doing watershed restoration, trying to bring the beavers back, have some of the best regenerative agriculture in the world. There are a lot of orchards and regenerative or organic farming that's done there. And Paonia is a town of 1,500 people, which means it's small enough that as a community, they could invite us to come visit them. And I gave a public talk at the Paonia Public Library to about 30 people on a Friday night. And then on a Saturday morning in one of the community spaces, I gave a workshop on bioregional design. And it was absolutely transformative for the members of the community. Absolutely transformative. And I'd love to invite Benji and Penny to talk about that as much as they like. What I want to stress is that there were 3 things we were able to talk about that were catalyzing and transforming them. We were able to talk about how to form pro-social groups. We were able to bring the landscape processes of Common Land Foundation, how to organize landscape partnerships, and how to implement partnerships at the landscape scale. And we held a space for collective trauma that the local community could not talk about themselves. But as outsiders, we opened up the sensitivity to that space. And so these 3 thematic areas, healing of collective trauma, which includes decolonization and unlearning, how to form pro-social groups and govern the commons, and how to set up and manage landscape partnerships, were 3 things that Benji, Penny, and I could bring as outsiders to transform the local community. and then help them have continuity. We did it again the next day in Carbondale in the Roaring Fork Basin. So we actually catalyzed those dynamics in 2 bioregions in the span of a weekend. And now in 2 days, both of those places are going to host their follow-up meetings, and we're offering them outside support, like Benji and Penny are talking to them about how to train them in pro-social and take them through pro-social processes. And I have now formalized a relationship with Common Land Foundation. We can bring the landscape partnership approach of Common Land to these landscapes, and they don't have to pay a cent. No necesitan pagar un centavo, Penny. Thought you'd laugh at that. That's a little joke between us. A penny in Spanish is centavo. They don't have to pay a penny. They don't have to pay a penny because we bring them penny. And so I just wanted to give you a feeling for this, because all this is going to enable us to raise funds for Barichara and all the work that's happening in Barichara and highlight it. But as of right now, we're planning to bring the Regenerative Community Land Trust team from Colorado to Barichara to prototype their decentralized governance model for community land trusts on Las Albercas. And at the same time, they will learn from us about the work we're doing with our community foundation in Barichara to inform how they do their work in Colorado. We don't have dates yet, but I'm hoping we can try and make it possible for them to come here in January or February at the latest. And so these mutual exchanges between bioregions are about to go deep and fast. And Penny and I are going to be traveling around the world to activate bioregions wherever we are invited, wherever we get an earnest invitation, with the idea that we want to directly touch at least 100 bioregions in the next 2 years, and then enable a cascade to get to 500 or more bioregions by 4 or 5 years, so that we can achieve planetary scale by 2030, because there is 0 time left to waste. We're so far past abrupt climate change tipping points and other parts of the Earth system's collapse processes that there is absolutely no time left to waste. And so Penny and I are completely changing our lives. We're sort of freaking out about it, trying to figure out how to include Elise and travel and all these other things, raising money to support us to do it, and so on and so forth. But before talking about that, I want to ask if either Benji or Penny would like to share, and I can highlight you on the screen to tell a little bit about your experiences. Benji?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, just I'll probably be echoing a bit of what Joe's already said, but I'm just so struck by this activation process. I've pictured what it might look like, but until I actually got to experience it, any imagination or vision that I have of it just paled in comparison. There was just so much energy that was catalyzed, and I'm sure that people that we're going to refi Barichara got to experience this too. But just creating the space for people to come under this common story. And then, as Joe mentioned, also bringing in pro-social and the Common Land framework really anchored them to how all this might unfold. And it just brought people together in this really powerful way. And I'm sure that there was a lot of that already present. There's so many regenerative projects that are already throughout the Gunnison River Valley that, like Joe previously mentioned, but I did sense that there was something new, that, this whole new source of energy had been brought in, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. I plan to get back out to Paonia, to the Gunnison River Valley, to Carbondale and the Roaring Fork Valley relatively soon. I might end up spending some time out there. I'm kind of waiting on a strong invitation from the landscape itself. But as Joe's talking about, activating more and more bioregions, there's one more thing actually I'd like to bring in that I felt, and I think Joe also sort of mentioned this a moment ago, but as Joe and Penny go to activate bioregions and they travel within a larger region to multiple bioregions, there's just going to be an immense amount of mutual support amongst them. And the example that we talked about in Colorado the most was between Paonia and Carbondale, or between Gunnison River Valley and Roaring Fork. They just have so many complementary characteristics, and I can just see them growing together, keeping each other sort of going and inspired and learning from one another and exchanging resources. And so that's really interesting. And I'm sure that we'll be seeing more and more of that. Yeah, I really excited to see how we can support all of this in places like the bioregional catalysts in our mapping practices. Joe mentioned that Penny and I are looking into how we can support continued explorations of pro-social and trainings in pro-social for bioregions that have just been activated. In our bioregional mapping practice session yesterday, we reflected on the activation process and how we can develop support structures for that. And what the kinds of things that we would intend to do. One example is as a bioregion is activated, there's just so much energy and enthusiasm, but there's also this process of needing to form the core team for the bioregional host to perhaps get funding for them to sort of organize themselves to carry the process. Is there some way that we can lend support in those early days for bioregions to help them carry forward energy to continue to build so that that doesn't dissipate? And then let's see if there's anything else I wanted to bring in. It was just so exciting. It was just so deeply inspiring. Like I felt like, yeah, I was just so humbled by it all. And I talk about this in the article that I'm going to publish today or tomorrow. But there's this paradox of feeling like this is just something that's just so important and powerful. And you know, I'd even say like, you know, we threw on the word historical a little bit, but at the same time, we're like sitting around dinner tables and, you know, the bioregional host welcomed us and their kid had just swallowed a toy and we're just, you know, trying to comfort the kid and getting to know them in that context. And there's just this humility to it all. It's being in community and forming relationships and friendships is what this is all about. So yeah, there's something beautiful there. And I think I might leave it at that. There's nothing else that's really standing out that I'd like to share at the moment.
Thanks. Thanks, Benji. Penny, on to you.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to just emphasize, it's something I brought up in our call yesterday as well with Benji's group, is what was really effective or where I saw the most impact was there was the context setting with Joe's presentation, but then it was when we got into the circles, when we got into the big circles in the bioregions and everybody could see each other and say why they were there and say kind of a little bit about what they're working on and interested in. It was that pro-social process where everybody could see, oh, who's showing up in this group. Like they were just curious about who would show up and who was interested. And that process started to bring forward in Paonia, at least, as we got into small groups, and then after that into a sharing group. The trauma, just a little bit of the need for healing, like people started speaking about how important that would be for this to work. And so that process of people seeing each other and starting to build even just a little bit of trust in that process. And then even in that short of time, this came forward, some of the traumas, and it started to be revealed. So I just wanted to emphasize that it was really beautiful. Also, something we started to talk to Alex about and what we're starting to think about with the Web3 world and the finance tools is how do we start to tell the story of maybe even multiple bioregions, and that the Web3 tools and the world can start to pool funds that can go into bioregions like as starter funds. So that's starting to be really interesting as we're starting to activate more bioregions. How can we tell the story of the multiple bioregions together and start to make sure that they're ready on the ground to receive funds and distribute funds, but starting to congregate, or I don't know if that's the right word, but pool resources that are going into bioregions. So that's that could give the Web3 world some focus on how to actually and build trust between Web3 world and on the ground projects, that they can just allocate the funds and they know it's going to go to something powerful that will actually have impact. So I think that's all I'll bring in for now and see if what that brings up for Joe, if you have anything else on that or anybody else.
Yeah, before going to open discussion, I want to just add that one thing that became clear for us was how we created a context of emotional and social transformation, but not a process of institutional transformation. And the difference could be felt in follow through. Like if we had arrived in Paonia, where all of that happened in 2 days, and we were then able to just find like $5,000, some modest amount of money, because Marissa, who invited us there, she's been the director of Transition US for 10 years. But Transition US struggles to have funding, and she's about to have a funding gap. And she's like Gail often talks about, right? She's like always looking for money instead of doing the work. And we could just feel what it would have meant to be able to just give Marissa a little money to do this for a few months and devote herself to facilitating and hosting the community dialogues. That would have actually created the context of institutional change. You know, not that institutional change would definitely flow from that, but basically institutional change definitely will not flow unless that happens. That was so clear to us. And so what we started thinking about, Penny and I, and we're talking with Benji about it too, but it's mostly like Penny and I just sort of like in our little duo dynamic of the two of us together. I was like, wow, imagine if we raised enough money to support Penny and me to travel like this, to have funding to just support Benji to do all the things he's doing, like basically bioregional catalysts sustained and in community. And then we had a budget where as we go to bioregions, we have the opportunity to bring them a little bit of funding. So we show up and we catalyze them and do things, and they don't have to pay us anything because we're completely supported. And then afterwards, we just do a little simple needs assessment with them. And like in the case of Paonia, we could see that Marissa needed to be funded for a couple of months. And Brian, your question about two forms of transformational change versus institutional change, I would just say that most social change is not transformational. Most social change is just people trying to change something, but the whole system stays the same. So they try to make this horrible system a little bit less horrible for a little bit of the system. Like these 10 families no longer have domestic violence, and that's better, but the system that generated all the cultural pathology of the violence, that stays the same. And so most social change is not transformation. Whereas transformational change is when your paradigms break down and you enter an exploration into a different paradigm, which is fractal, so it happens at all scales. So we were seeing transformational change in the individual participants and among them as a potential network of collaborators. But their lack of institutional transformation is, while they could sustain that for a half-day workshop, there was no organizational structure to allow them to change their institutions so that social network of relationships changes institutions. And I was just saying that we created like a seed of transformation within individuals and small groups. But unless those small groups co-evolve into their own organizing structures, they're left to just adopt the existing organizing structures, which means they did not transform the system. So I hope that's enough clarity. There's a lot more to say, but real transformational change is like the golden egg of social impact and impact investing that almost no one achieves. And we've actually found the way to do it because it's an evolutionary process. And we're looking for the way to create the decentralized flow of resources that would enable all of this to enter into a network of bioregions, as Penny was saying.
Can I just, I'd like you to clarify just a bit in relation to what you were saying earlier with respect to independent political governance. So more specifically in the realm of polity or governance. So what you're saying here about social change, readily concur and agree with that. How are you experiencing then this process that you're saying that you've found a way of doing it? in that realm or dimension of governance. Because that's where I'm working with some significant resources along those lines, and yet in my pro-social engagement right now, there is a disconnect. It is not, it's not cohesive. It's not working together well.
Well, let me give the example of what we're preparing to do with the money we raised from Gitcoin. Because we raised about $21,000 on Gitcoin for Barichara. And because we already have a 2-year process to create a territorial foundation, and that community process is slow and deep because it's all about building trust and mapping things together and creating shared agendas, which means it's all about governance, that we decided, we might change our mind after this gift from the Mustard Seed Trust, but we had decided that we would take most of the money from Gitcoin and start a governance process where we would invite the people representing the projects we want to support, that they would all come together, create an integrated budget from the money, and allocate it to themselves as a network of projects in order to practice governance. And then we were going to pull a small part of the money out, maybe $3,000 or $4,000, that would just go directly to support the continuity of existing projects so that that governance process could take as long as it needs. Now that we're receiving this $10,000 gift for Centropic Agriculture, we may decide to give all of the $21,000 of Gitcoin to that process. And so what I want to emphasize here is that the arrival of the money gives us the opportunity to practice governance. And so we say, here's, in this case, like $20,000 is about, it's about 90 million Colombian pesos, which is a lot of money in Colombia. And then 90 million pesos could be divided across to 10 different projects, or those projects could be supported for like 6 months for all of them. So think of supporting 10 local projects for 6 months is a lot of money. If you think about what it would cost in the US, it would be substantially more, but just think of it in that way of 10 local projects in a US community might cost you $500,000 for 6 months. Whereas here we're doing it with $20,000, but it's the same idea. It's a significant amount of money that we could just give directly to projects. Like, how much did you ask for? How much did you ask for? But I'll give an example of how this started to work. After Refi Barichara, people were so excited in Barichara, so excited, like, wow, I can work with people like Gitcoin and they'll bring us money. Let's create a Gitcoin grant for the Bioparque. And let's create a Gitcoin grant for Centropic Agriculture. But then when you look at their budgets, the Bioparque is doing educational things that could actually be blended with Centropic Agriculture. And Centropic Agriculture created a budget to do things in the Bioparque that they didn't even talk to the Bioparque about yet. They didn't even know if they'd have permission to do it. And so we could use less money than their separate budgets and address everything they want to do in an integrated way just by having those two projects sit down together. So see how governance is more important than money. And so what we're actually going to do is bring money from Gitcoin and use it to spend 6 months practicing governance. And it may be that no one gets any money for 6 months because it may take them 6 months to decide how to spend the money, but they've practiced bioregional governance. So I just wanted to show you that's like a concrete way of seeing how this works. That we'll do the same thing in Paonia. We'll say, well, we might bring in money to support Marissa as a community organizer for the next few months. But there was another person at the event who has, it was at least $1.5 million of personal money that they were going to use to buy a piece of land in Paonia to create a regenerative learning center. And they had access to possibly $2 or $3 million more. And I just told this person, you should form a local council of people to tell you how best to spend that money. If you're going to bring $1.5 million, you may not need to buy land. You may be able to partner with existing land, but have them turn it into a community trust. And you see how governance before money. Because governance is about making decisions to allocate resources, among other things. And so I hope that starts to make it a little more clear that transformation of institutions is to focus on these pro-social governing of the commons kinds of processes around the use of resources.
Very, very helpful, Joe. Thank you. Appreciate
You're
it.
very welcome. And now I will add Claire. Come on in.
Yeah. Hang on. Yeah, I love what you've brought in because that, and I guess I wanted to just build on that just a little bit because for fundraising, sometimes sort of when we're talking about pots of money or grants, or I've often seen, you know, I don't know why, I'm just like the only one on the screen.
Oh, because I put you on the screen so we could see.
Oh, okay.
That was me.
Yeah. Is that I see fundraising and not necessarily fiat currency, like the multi-capital piece, is it's an opportunity to invite others to be part of the work you're doing, and which helps find the others that we need to be working with that are often way outside of our own domains of what we're working with. And to me, so that often takes a lot of energy, and often we don't have the time to go and look for that. But if we forget that aspect, it's just another layer. And I think I just want to make sure that it was named, that it's an opportunity to find the others. And yeah, but building on all that you've said, I'm just so excited that you've expressed what you have.
Just wanted to name, this is exactly why the Common Land model has a core team. So on Friday night in Paonia, when I gave a talk at the library, there was this incredible habitat restoration guy there. He was like, you know, the kind of guy like goes out and brings a river back to life, or like restores the fishery, like those kinds of ecological restoration work. This guy was amazing. And he saw me give a talk about planetary collapse and bioregional regeneration. And he comes up to me afterwards and says, this is so amazing. And I really want to be involved with this. And I'm so busy with my work. And I just said, dude, this is why we have someone other than you be the core team and you do the awesome work you're doing. And then I explained to him, this is project management. This is community organizing. There is a team whose job is to host and facilitate and convene and plan and develop strategies and do participatory design and engage the community. And the people doing like the habitat restoration or the regenerative ranching or whatever else, they focus on that and they participate in these activities. And he completely got it. He was like, thank God I don't have to worry about doing it, but I definitely want to be involved. And you could just feel like that idea, like, because he knew it was so important that he had to do it too. And I was like, no, please don't do that. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. And what you're also speaking to is the ongoing relationship. Yes, you know, you go and do what you need to go and do, but we're not going to leave you out of it. So we don't just take your money or your resources or your whatever and get on with it. It's like there's an ongoing relationship there.
Yeah. So what Common Land Foundation's model has one really deep secret, which is pervasive in the whole model, which is that almost all funding goes to projects and almost no funding goes to process. And everything about their model is process. They literally name, our landscape model has 5 processes. Forming a landscape team is 1, forming a landscape partnership. Creating a landscape plan is number 2. Notice that's something you continually update. Implementing the plan is process number 3. Creating monitoring on the process. You see, these are the landscape processes. And that's what you do for a minimum 20 years continuously. And that's the Common Land model, is a process approach to integrating the landscape. And so that just tells you how important it is. It's all about process, because the projects exist alongside and are completely interwoven with those processes. And those projects have all kinds of ways to get funding, but good and bad, but there's no funding for process. And so the Common Land model is a narrative that tells funders how to get to process, which is what we're bringing doing bioregional activation, is we're bringing those processes and the story, and more, the informed funders, if we do this right, which is what Common Land does. So that's that important. All right, Stan, on to you. Hello.
Oh, no, thank you. This is, of course, very inspirational. And I really loved your breakdown of it into 3 simple things. The Common Land stuff is very referenceable, and Pro-Social is a book with Eleanor Ostrom Nobel Prize winning a validation. But you said trauma, and I think in response to Brian's question, I kind of kept waiting for you to say trauma, because I think the scale linking starts very low. It starts within yourself in some way. And maybe you just take it for granted, but I think, we just sort of start talking about theories or institutions. And really, what Penny said was it starts with trust. And then what Claire kind of showed was listening, something I'm not very good at. But I think that's, at the heart of this, what's different. It's at the core being open, but even better, being listening and getting over the other to being caring in some way.
Yeah.
And so I think with Todd, we talk a lot about trust. It's not just land trust, it's trust. And I think it's caring is part of trust, and the listening part of trust. It's not the talking part of, pro-social. It's the listening part of pro-social. So anyway, I think you've really got it going, but I also think it starts, inside yourself in some way, and your ability to bring that out in these groups, so people are feeling like Claire. It's kind of her group.
Yeah, I'd love to invite Penny if there's anything you want to share related to this. But before inviting Penny, I just want to name that I think saying we're going to show up to help people with trauma would blow up in our faces, but showing up very prepared to hold and talk about trauma, it's like it comes up in the first 5 minutes. And the way that I talk about planetary collapse makes it possible to talk about trauma. So there's a whole thing about what it means to step deep into the grief of what's happening in the planet. And Penny, is there anything you would like to add to that? And Stephen,
Yeah.
like that. So I'll add Penny to the screen, and then
Go ahead,
Penny and
Penny.
Stephen. But Penny, you first.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the way that the level of authenticity that Joe brings when he's talking about planetary collapse and there's an actual path that we could take is, and then the creating of the circle and just letting people share why they're there, seeing each other it's like that sort of opens up a space for the trust to at least start to be built. And it opened up the space in this case in people's hearts is what I saw. Like they started to talk about it in the big group, but then in the processes we actually did after the group, where we went to lunch with a few people, and then we went and we looked at the watershed from above, and it was a different group, and people started opening up there, and then we went to a pub, and this is where, like,
Micro group is in Colorado.
yeah.
Hey, you got your beer.
Sorry, I had to say
So,
that.
yeah. So that started to open up, we could see somebody feeling emotional about something that happened, in the community from before. And we start to get a sense of like, oh, there's some healing that needs to happen. So it's like coming in, but it's like a specific way. It's the authenticity, I feel like, really opens people if we come in with that. And then actually doing pro-social processes without even saying we're doing pro-social processes. But it's the beginning. Like, it started to open people up for healing their own hearts. And then there needs to be support. I mean, that's what I'm seeing, is there has to be support going forward as that starts to happen. So the activation, but then also support with pro-social or trauma work, or that's what I'm seeing, is it's gonna people will need support in doing that kind of healing to be able to cooperate at the level that's needed at these scales. So that's what I'm seeing.
Stephen.
So I'm going to get on my anti-problem solving soapbox here. So I'm just going to name it to start. And Stan, you bring out a good point, because we need to deal with the traumas. That's what traps us. But focusing on the trauma or bringing attention to the trauma is focusing on the things that are wrong rather than the things that are inspiring us and moving us forward. And as I know, even spending my life as a personal growth junkie, I could spend the rest of my life trying to heal my traumas and do all these things to fix my past and never get what I want. And we saw in the refi event, there was no talk about trauma, and there was trauma that came up. So there's like, it will be there, and the trauma to be dealt with will show up in the environments. So the important piece in understanding the trauma healing is to make sure that the teams that go in to support the regions know how to handle that. And if they can, if appropriate, going into the region, most of those regions will have people who've been doing their own work of whatever form for a while. So may be advanced partnering if that comes up in the conversation. But I don't think we need to put any attention on that. We just need to have the tools and the care to manage that, to take care of that when it comes up.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I said, we don't have to talk about, we don't have to name that we're bringing trauma healing. We just know trauma's everywhere in this, everywhere. So, so I totally agree with what Stephen's saying. Brian, yes, what would you like to?
You know, along these same lines, and I kind of, I don't know how many people within the group would be familiar with the Diane Musho Hamilton's work, but back some years ago, around, I had posted just in the last minute or so comment to the chat about shadow, and kind of whether the idea of shadow, which is kind of a projected transference, I think we've touched upon it in prior conversation. But I'm in the group moderating that I do. What I'm envious of a couple of things that I sometimes don't have in that capacity or role as a group moderator is the collective element. And Joe is using a second person, Penny and I, and deferring, and how important that supporting other is in it's really co-moderating. And so often a moderator doesn't have that co-moderating facet dimension to work with. The other thing, Joe, quite frankly, that I admire in you, I've learned patience in clinical settings to a great extent to listen, but sometimes that becomes an expectation within the group, that the group's members will go, no, can kind of impose upon the moderator, co-moderators, no, you're here to listen to me. And I'm like, you know, we didn't have that understanding necessarily, shared understanding coming in. So, you know, a lot of this for me is personal boundaries and trying to, as graciously as possible, observe my own boundaries, but in that shared context that everybody has their personal respective boundaries, and it's not easy doing that. What I was going to say about Joe is that he impresses me as being more compassionate, maybe not more empathetic, but certainly more compassionate than I kind of understand myself to be, although it gives me something to work towards. Thanks for allowing me that. I appreciate it.
Brian, thank you for that. I'm wondering what if Benji might share something. I'll put you on the spot, so you don't have to. But like, what was it like to be in the same space with me as I was facilitating? Because I do have a distinctive way of going about it, but I'm curious what it felt like. Because what it felt like for you. You know, Penny's been around a little longer, so you have fresher. This is like a newer experience for you. I'm just curious what you'd say.
Yeah, you know, I just more than anything, I was really struck by how charismatic and emergent you were in your facilitation style overall. How open you were to other people joining in. You know, you certainly pointed in the direction of Penny and I multiple times and emphasized that we were part of a whole. So I felt that way. And I think if there was ever a need for us to step in or an opportunity, we would have been there. I mean, you definitely are improvising. And that became really clear on day 2 and made it fun. You know, it made it feel very interactive. It wasn't a boring, dry lecture. I don't know if I have anything more to add than that, but I do think that, you know, we talked about this a little bit in the car on the way to Carbondale, but you know, if more of us are going to step into this activation role, improvisation is such a big part of it. You talked before the first talk about how calm you were, how you were like presencing yourself and just ready to go with the flow. I think that's such an important part of all this as we're sensing into what it is that the community needs, what it is that they're responding to, and how to dance with those particular rising elements. Yeah.
No, thank you for that, because I think it's important to have a sense of the feeling of it. And really the feeling of it is to feel it, to not have a planned agenda that you just follow the plan, but you don't feel what's happening, but to actually feel moment to moment what's happening. I'd love to shift focus for just a bit. And Dan, it's so nice to see you. Hi. Lovely to see you, Dan. One of the things that came up, and Dan, this is something I'm going to want to talk with you about, is our conversation with the Recommon team, which is the guys that created the Regenerative Community Land Trust group in Colorado. They've developed a framework for how to walk someone through the process of sharing equity and creating governance for community land trust. And they're looking for land to practice with. And they're like, in Paonia, we want to do this, but we need $1.2 million to buy this farm. And until we have the land, we can't practice the design of governance. And I said, you know, we just bought Las Albercas, right? Do you guys want to come to Barichara and help us go through a design process to learn? And then you could showcase what we're doing in Barichara. And I mean, they were like salivating at it because they were just so excited that like there's a real community and real land, you know, that's already present. And so I want to also name this thing about what it really means to do commoning. You know, the verb to common, not the commons that's a noun, is the commoning that we could meet with these 4 really great guys in Colorado. They're like awesome. Permaculture designers, landscape restoration practitioners, software developers, all mixed into one. Like one of their main guys does dryland agroecology work at scale, and his background's in marketing. Like, just awesome. These guys are totally awesome. And to be able to say, well, we're commoning, you know, we have 2 pieces of land in Barichara that are currently legally privately owned for the sake of needing to finish the purchase process with an intention to start very delicate, drawn out, probably slow, and very deep community processes. Like, what does it mean for Las Albercas to become community owned? It is a process. We got to figure this out. And here's a group of people that are trying to practice and teach other people the importance of this practice that we could bring to Barichara. And so it's just like the power of commoning, that there wasn't an agenda of how do I use them? How do they use me? It's that we were already in a shared commons. We arrived at the table at this coffee shop in downtown Boulder. What I told them, it was sort of funny, is I said, can we just skip all the introductions? Because we're going to be friends for a long time. And so we're going to get a chance to get to know each other. I think we can all assume that we arrived at this table because we plan to collaborate for the long term. Is everyone okay with that? And they're like, yes, let's get past the bullshit. Let's just do it. And I said, so could you guys just take 5 minutes to say what kind of collaboration you want to do with us? We'll take 5 minutes to say the collaboration we want to do with you. And then we just jump deep in. Where I could easily say things like, well, we just finished the purchase of Las Albercas. We need the help of the kind of thing you're doing. Do you guys want to come to Barichara? It was like, it's so natural, so easy to be in this place of deep trust when we're commoning. And I think this is how we're going to bring money and resources to different landscapes. Is we arrived to Marissa and her husband Jeremiah and their son Gabriel, who had just eaten a toy and had to go to the hospital. It was like a little round thing. It turned out perfectly fine, but just as a precaution, they went to the hospital. But it was like, we arrived as though we were like their aunt and uncle coming to the family. You know, we didn't arrive as paid consultants giving a talk who have to perform to satisfy the funder's needs. There was none of that, like none. It was so refreshing for them to to be a commons together. And just, I really want to stress the importance of that. Antonio, I see your hand is up. Jump on in. Or did you not? Come on in.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I saw the photos in Paonia, and everybody's like on the ridge, like looking at the the landscape, and it looked like the scene from Empire Strikes Back with the rebels on the ice planet Hoth. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on like how well-timed refi Barichara was. I feel like we just snuck it right in to the subliminal messaging right on time. And maybe I could give a little bit of an update on the vibe shift around crypto in general, refi specific, because I feel like there's on the surface, everything looks to be falling apart, but what I'm feeling is the undercurrent is bringing everything together.
Yep.
So, and how does the bioregional activator act as a coherence mechanism to bring people around these common values? Because I feel like with COP27 happening right now, not to mention implications of the US state in this SBF meltdown, which could be intentional, who knows? I mean, I think what's happening now is people are coming into that feeling that there needs to be a shift, and not just in messaging, but also in behavior. So I feel like that we have a very beautiful possibility right now where we can be bringing in people who have traditionally been more tech focused into the cultural expansion. And how do we create a more cohesive story to bring more people in to the building around bioregions? Because if anybody's been following my tweets lately, I may be saltier than normal, but I am helping. I feel like I need to be more vocal and just being very explicit, and people are responding. And so I think it's good. We're making progress. In terms of how do we start to structure these systems, I think it's still very much up for debate, but we almost have to like get those traumas out to actually get to the real work. And so I'm currently refocusing on getting Refi Cecilia up and running for this spring. And Simona is my neighbor to the north, and she's very graciously volunteered to help with that organization. And I think we're all going through, both Simona and I, we're going through like the shit where we are literally knee deep in regeneration, where we are out in the olive groves. We are doing the pruning, we're doing the harvesting, we're just dealing with the neighbors. So it's very much an embodied experience and a very cathartic experience, because we're seeing how much needs to change, how inefficient the system is, how backwards things have been. And that's going to give us the drive and the motivation and the energy to be a catalyst and to be an activator. So Joe, we're going to have to figure out a way to get you on a boat or a plane or something over here.
As long as I can bring Penny.
Absolutely. Yeah. Penny and the gang. Penny.
And at least Michael too. Yeah. Antonio, I really came on the screen because I just wanted to, I wanted to be beside you again, like the way that we were just creating so beautifully for Refi Barichara. And I wanted to name that in our conversation with Recommon, for those who don't know, they're also trying to create a bioregional token and a bioregional blockchain system, and they're calling it the common credit. And so they're trying to create a credit for a commons that is a token for bioregions, which means they're trying to, and actually, those of you who don't know, Antonio's worked with them and they're all friends. And, you know, you sort of look around the world, we're a bunch of co-conspirators. We all know each other. But I just wanted to name that they were very interested in seeing how they could come to Barichara and also do it in Paonia, because it's in their backyard, to work with Sev and Sam, who are still here in Barichara, creating eco-credit designs, that the eco-credit designs could actually scale up to what it would mean to create a bioregional scale token. And this, for those who don't know, is really just like a value and status tracking system for how people participate in these landscape processes. And there's a lot of details that Antonio could speak at length about, But I just wanted to name that this is actually a big deal because it's a big part of bioregional governance is to create our own bioregional financial systems. And so I just wanted you to know that that was the two things they were passionate about were prototyping the Regenerative Community Land Trust governance model on Las Albercas and maybe Origen del Agua. And then also to work on their commons credit with us in tracking value flows in the portfolio of projects in Barichara, while we help them sustain it in Paonia as well, by helping them to find funding for them to do that. And so just so you can all see how we might help Recommon find funding to do this work in Paonia, but they may prototype some of it in Barichara. And when they find the funding because it's for 2 bioregions, not 1. Just going back to what Penny said is, the story is much more powerful to raise funds. Like I posted on Twitter, who would give me $2 million for 1 million hectares of land? And I was just talking about Rollinsville, Paonia, and Barichara. I didn't include the other 2 bioregions we ended up touching because I didn't know about them yet. And then when we met with Timo and Jeff from Basin DAO, these guys are creating a peer-to-peer finance system where one watershed can fund another and create exchanges, which is this bioregional token, this way of tracking the value of the entire portfolio and then going down to the basin level. That's what the guys in Carbondale are doing. And we're all friends now. We're all going to be hanging out a lot. So I just want to jump on in.
I hope what becomes more apparent from this, from kind of this, this whirlwind is that all of these individual refi product teams that are building are realizing that this is never going to work spread out across different chains, spread off, you know, different ecosystems. I think everybody's kind of slowly coming to that conclusion. And the only way that we're going to build a planetary scale system is for everybody to work together into some type of interoperable, compatible, composable system. So I think that's, for me, the big takeaway from Refi Barichara was what we're doing on Web3. Web3 is for degens by degens. So we're trying to build refi onto this kind of degen platform, but what's becoming apparent is planetary regeneration is going to be way bigger than what Web3 is, and that we're going to have to kind of collectively co-create in an emergent way this planetary bioregional network. And I think that's what 2023 is going to be more about, is how do we start to align and to start to combine efforts, not in any one company or any one country is being the lead, but it's more of a inherent understanding. So I think that this year has been more of a kind of like an incubation phase, and also a kind of a reality check because it's too big for any one team to do all of this. And yeah, so I think I'm more sensitive and also very like, I'm feeling more, I wouldn't say impatient, but almost I'm not disappointed either. I'm just kind of like, come on guys, we don't have to go on this circus one more time. Like, I don't want to go on this merry-go-round one more time. It's already been 3-4 crypto cycles. Like we got to get our, you know, act together for this next cycle. So we've just kind of reset the clock on this 4-year, it kind of like follows election cycles, but it was initiated by the Bitcoin halving cycle, which happens every 4 years. So we get like kind of on this clock. So we've just reset the clock. Now we have this next 4-year window to really think deeply, strategize, and to actually figure out how do we implement and execute these bioregional scale regeneration platforms and financing mechanisms. So,
well, let me use that as a plug, Antonio, which is, it became clear to Penny, Benji, and I that if we had $150,000 right now, it would fund Penny and me to travel all over the world for the next year. It would fully fund Benji to do everything he's doing to help the sustained supports to bioregions. And it would give us a budget to bring money to the bioregions we come to for at least 10 bioregions in the next year. And what I see as really key, actually essential, is that we get people in the landscapes in the real world communities, because that's where all of this comes together. Like talking with Timo and Jeff in Carbondale, instead of on Twitter, we were actually in the Roaring Fork Basin. We hiked up one of the trails there, and they got it because we were standing in their landscape together, and they're already thinking about landscapes. And then Jeff came over for the workshops and the talks in Paonia. And now
Jeff Stevens?
Jeff Stevens, yeah. Jeff Stevens is amazing. Holy shit, he's way cooler than I thought. Like, I just had no idea how cool he was going to be. But like a botanist who knows population ecology that well and can design financial systems. Holy shit, this guy's amazing. And so just to say that talking with them as Basin DAO within the Roaring Fork Basin was totally different than talking to them about Basin DAO for Barichara online. It was, and Benji and Penny can attest, it was totally different. So we have to go to these bioregions and face-to-face do this. And so just naming that, it's going to be a big deal. So if you can organize Sicily to receive us, just invite us. Penny and I are just waiting for invitations at this point, and then working out what kind of a shit show it is to make it happen from there. So I see Brian has his hand up, so I'll go to Brian, and then I'd love to invite us into a closing unless if anyone else has something they want to share.
Maybe Antonio could keep his screen on for just a second, because I'd kind of like to address the question. I'm just wondering, is there anything in the way of centralized resources that would help facilitate my schooling, basically in the whatever model you're using with respect to the cyber currencies? What I have to get beyond is my old school finance major and framework. I'm reasonably good in my understanding of currency, and distributed systems, but specifically with the bioregional applications, although I would hope to integrate in relation to governance, is kind of where, is there anything in the way of a site or mobilized?
Well, unfortunately, the refi education is very spread out and also kind of out of date and already inaccurate. However, what is still evergreen material is my pinned tweet from January of this year, where I basically went through chapter 14 of the Permaculture Designer's Manual, which was written in the 1980s, and then updated to that, to how would that look like with the Web3 integration using these DeFi DAO tooling. So, I mean, I think by the end of this year, I'll probably have to get a new pin tweet, but by then Joe will probably have written something better. But a lot of this technology is developing very fast. But what I'm basing this most around is Cosmos ecosystem, which is basically you can create a blockchain that can talk to every other blockchain. Because the issue is, how do you send assets from one ledger to another ledger? And there's different architectures that are kind of being tested out. We still don't know who's going to be the winner because we're in very early stages. So there's a lot of building on different chains, but going from Joe's earlier story, the Luna collapse, which was, I mean, yes, it's easy to get greedy. But it just goes to the fact that if we're building bioregional finance, we need bioregional digital infrastructure and architecture. So that's just the main thing to understand, is that if we're building these digital financial tools for communities, the community has to be the owner and the operator of that infrastructure. And there has to be clear incentive mechanisms for people to maintain that infrastructure. Going into holochain is a whole nother rabbit hole, and I'll let Stephen take care of that introduction. But yeah, just share the link in the chat. So thank you for being curious.
Yeah, the one thing I would add before going on to Jonas is just that I talk about this as collaborative finance and governance, just as a shorthand, that you cannot separate them. The movement of resources and the governance of the system that moves resources. I mean, just look at neoliberal capitalism. That is a funding governance system. So we need alternative funding governance systems for bioregions. And it's a huge topic of conversation. So Jonas, on to you, and hi, welcome, glad you're here.
Thanks a lot. I would like to hear your thoughts about education in the time of collapse. I've read your article that was called something like "Drop Out of schooler. I'm not completely sure anymore. I'm just thinking a lot about, yeah, I'm at the point where I will have to decide how I want to educate myself. And I see both many potentials in like mainstream universities that are maybe not there as not there in alternative education, and vice versa. So I would really like to hear your thoughts on what your recommendation would, or in general of any one of you all, what your recommendation would be in today's day and age in order to get a solid understanding of our world situation and also find solutions. What would be a good, helpful path in higher education?
Yeah, this is such a good question, and it's so important. I've been doing a lot of work on this, and the ecoversity we're creating in Barichara is one of the attempts to create alternatives. The key thing that we need to have in place is we need to have community land, because we need people to be able to get an education without having to pay for it, and the ability to do work exchanges, where they basically get their housing and their food in exchange for learning and practicing, all in an integrated approach. So much of our ability to learn right now is done with what are basically like MOOCs, multi-user online courses, and then just self-directed learning on the internet, that you can replace almost all of what you would get at a university without having to pay for it, without ever going to a university. And the problem is that as people learn things, like if you go and get a permaculture design certificate or any other kind of online learning, the problem is that you don't have a community and a place to practice, which is true in a university as well. You have to get a job, right? You study things, then you have to have someone hire you to be able to do the thing you learned. And so I turn it around and say, we need to have a context where people can learn regeneration and practice regeneration while they're learning it. So they learn it while they're doing it. And this happens because it's on shared land. And the land is shared with the mission of the education. So, so my recommendation to you would be to ask yourself, what is it that you're really passionate to learn about? It's just similar to what would you major in college, but notice it's a different question. What you major in college depends on what's offered and what you think your economic consequences are. Like, I really want to be a philosopher, but no one will pay me. That's part of how universities are set up. So this bypasses all of that. What are you passionate to learn about? Because it's something you really want to do, something you really care about. I actually think you should talk to Tyler, who's here on this call, because Tyler has been, can you guys connect somehow? Because Tyler has done some university education, has been struggling to decide if he should do more, and he just spent a couple of months in Barichara, and this is the main question he's asking in his life. So I think the two of you talking will be really good. And the other thing would be to find a place where you can immerse yourself in a community that is doing regenerative work that gives you the flexibility to study whatever you want to study on your own. So it's sort of like homeschooling for college together with immersion in community and practice. And we've seen this happen in Barichara in a sort of messy way, that we don't have any structured program, and this confuses some people. It's actually creating a program would make it harder for it to work, but it's also harder to understand what it is. But if you were to go to some place like what we do in Barichara, where you arrive to the community and get to know the people and start helping out with some of the projects, but then you have flexibility so that you can study whatever you want to study, like you would do by watching YouTube videos or going on Wikipedia. Just you would go and study whatever you want to learn, and then have the flexibility to do online courses together with practicing with real world projects. Like, I want to learn about these crypto tools that Antonio's talking about because I'm trying to design a solution for this community. See, this is exactly where universities struggle, is to make this connection. And so what I see as the future of education is bioregional learning ecosystems. So they're actually learning ecosystems where you will arrive into a place that has many different kinds of learning activities, and you have to direct yourself through the learning because you know what you need to learn. Or you find a mentor that helps you find what you need to learn. Because the most important part of universities that people don't talk about is the craft skill and the mentorship. Like if you were to say in the 1600s, you go to a blacksmith, you actually apprentice in a guild of blacksmiths. What they don't tell us, but it's absolutely true, is if you want to become a physicist, you're actually learning a craft skill, and the laboratory is the place where you learn the craft skill, and you mentor with the professor because they know the craft skill. If you're going to become a lab chemist, you're going to learn how to make glass, like all the glass blowing that you need to learn. You're going to learn to make measurements. You're going to learn to use the equipment. All of that is like, if you were going to go into automotive, you would read manuals about automotive work, and then you'd go work in a garage. And that garage part of the university is probably the most valuable thing the universities have. Like I went to graduate school at the University of Illinois, which had one of the best supercomputing centers in the world, and all kinds of labs and an amazing library. I went there for the craft guild of the university, but no one told me that. Like no one told me that was what was actually valuable. And so I would encourage you to find the craft guild, the people who are practicing what you want to learn in an advanced way, and seek their mentorship. Reach out to them just as an individual and say, I really want to learn this. How do I learn it? They may give you books to read. They may actually mentor you and give you advice. Tyler could tell you what it was like when he and I were using machetes to clear the trails, but also talking about complexity science and emergence and pro-social and trauma healing. And I was mentoring him because he had asked me to. And so you're going to find the mentors are looking for the people to mentor by being invited. And so this is the opposite of how universities work. But that's my beginning of advice. And I would encourage you not to go to a university. Don't waste your time. Find it. Yeah, and don't waste the money, and just do it in a different way. And a good way would be like Workaway and Woofing and those kinds of learning exchanges. But if you can, connect it to a community and to a landscape, a place where there are people at least thinking at the larger scale, like their watershed or their mountain range. And I think Tyler will be able to give you some good ideas if you guys talk. And then you can come back and talk to anyone else here. There are a lot of us who are struggling with this question, even if we're not about to apply to college. We all have insights about why it doesn't work in the midst of planetary collapse. Is that helpful for you?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So have you and Tyler connected yet? You guys gonna get together? Before we end the call, be sure you guys can connect.
Yeah, I got this. I got this email. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we've now had about half of us need to leave, which is fine. But I'd love to just close by saying that we can all see and feel how different this is from just talking about Barichara. And at the same time, we will focus a lot on what's happening in Barichara moving forward. There's a lot to talk about related to, like right now, a lot of the projects in Barichara feel the pressure to try to raise money for themselves, as we keep trying to get them to slow down and say, we need to raise money for all of us together and avoid the problem of accidentally competing. They shouldn't be competing with each other. And so what it takes to get people to slow down and go through that process is one of the things we're dealing with right now. Luckily, we have the big tourist season is going to start in about a month, where for an entire month, no one in Barichara will do anything regenerative unless they're like me. You know, I'm not connected to the tourism economy at all, but almost everyone here is. And so they're about to be distracted by an entire month of 20,000 tourists at a time every day for a whole month, and the whole town turns into a circus. And that's going to force them to slow down, to think about budgets and planning, because they're just not going to have any time to do it. And that's a blessing for us in Barichara, because we need to have the time to bring them the money that will engage that governance process we talked about earlier. So finding ways to structurally slow down is going to be really, really important, because the urgency of what we need to do feels like we need to speed up, but that's exactly the wrong impulse. We actually need to slow down and form deep relationships. And then as we form deep relationships, we're continually making sense of what's happening, and our actions are 100 times more effective, which is why slowing down is so much more important. So I love how we just had this flowing conversation for the last hour and a half about what's happened in Colorado, what we're learning about bioregions, how to use Web3 and create different financial and governance systems, how trauma healing is a part of it. how all of this is connected to Barichara, even though we didn't talk about Barichara very much today. And how, like, just looking at Benji related to Penny and me, it's different now than it was a week ago. We're collaborating in a fundamentally different way. And with Antonio, with what we did for Refi Barichara, we're collaborating in a fundamentally different way. Chad, we got to get back together and figure out what we're doing, but we'll get there. I feel it. I see you. See you. And so just in closing today, keep connecting with each other and keep feeling into this big work of creating a planetary network of regenerative economies that are at this landscape scale. Know that Penny and I are about to create a huge amount of activity that we will not be able to contain, which means we're going to need a huge amount of help to do it. If Penny and I just visited 10 more or 20 more bioregions, we visited 4 in 8 days. This is really different than what we can imagine. If we end up visiting 20 or 30 or 40 in the next year, we're going to need a huge amount of help for follow through. And so just know that. We're basically stirring things up and we don't want them to settle afterwards. So we're giving ourselves an impossible task, so we're going to need a lot of help with it. So just know that and be looking for ways to plug in because we're going to need all of your help. And with that said, thank you, everyone. This has been a beautiful conversation. I will share the link below the comment thread under the Barichara and Beyond events. I'll put it on YouTube. You can share it anywhere you want. Invite people into this. And just for those of you who are so inclined, Penny and I are starting to actively raise money for Patreon because we want to get to where we have $4,000 a month. We're asking people to become contributors at a level of $10 per month each. So here's the link, just so you have it. If any of you know of someone who might be interested in making a $10 per month contribution, this will allow us to be free to visit all these landscapes and do this work. So I just wanted you to know that we're actually shifting modes slowly but surely, but we're going to be doing that. And just wanted to say, if you have people you wanted to like invite them to give a $10 gift to a cause for Christmas or whatever, if you'd ask them, just let them know what we're doing and invite them to get involved. Penny and I feel really strongly that the money we need is just going to appear from somewhere. So we're not worried about it. But we also know that being able to do this and bring money to the landscapes is our goal. We want to get to the point where we don't have to look for money for ourselves ever. So all the money we find goes to other people. And we're just in this moment of transition. So I want to let you all know that and ask for your help. We can do the crypto version of it too, maybe with Evan, since he's building that for nonprofits. But that's for another moment. So Penny, is there anything else you want to say before we close?
Nope, I think this was awesome.
Well, thank you, everyone. Onward and see you soon.